In this video, we are going to learn about AngularJS Watches or watching scope variables. We will also see on various types of watches we can accomplish using AngularJS. First of all, what exactly is AngularJS Watch? It is nothing but you are keeping track of scope variables. So whenever I say keeping track of, which means you are actually monitoring the changes of the values available inside the scope variables. Imagine I have a controller related markup defined in this fashion. So which means I have a div associated with controller X, which is having two elements. One is a text box and the other one is a div. So the text box is having two-way binding to A and the div is having one-way binding to B. So you can see the controller X defined with three variables, or say three scope variables. So the scope is having three members A, B and C, which are assigned with 1, 2 and 3 respectively. Let us see how watch works. First of all, a watch keeps track of a variable and its value. You can see here I have a variable called A, which is a scope variable obviously. And this particular variable A is being bound to this text box using ng model. So which means there is a two-way binding accomplished to the variable. So whenever we have a data binding to a scope variable, then a watch will be created automatically for us, and that will be handled by AngularJS framework automatically. Whenever you have some data binding to scope variables, all those variables will have their respective watches automatically created by AngularJS. So in this case, I have two elements having some data binding to two different scope variables, and thus I have two different watches created in the memory. So AngularJS automatically creates the watches for each of those particular scope variables which are being used as part of data binding. As I mentioned, the above watches are automatically created by AngularJS, and those will be used by digest cycle loop, which we are going to cover in my upcoming videos. For now, let us just consider it is being used by some other feature of AngularJS. Some variables may not be watched. So you can see scope C, currently there is no watch available. So which means that particular scope C as not being used in the form of data binding in this case, that will not be watched by AngularJS. So AngularJS framework takes its own decisions on what scope variables to watch and what not, based on the concepts of data binding and so on. So in this case, A and B are having watches to be created for themselves. However, for the variable C, there is no watch available. So which means AngularJS will not have any kind of monitoring to be applied for the variable C. However, the monitoring gets applied to A and B, and if any of the values of A and B gets modified, the DOM gets automatically rebound, and the values available A and B will be propagated to the DOM automatically. And that is what I am saying here. So if the value gets changed for any of the scope variables, Angular performs necessary updates, propagations to DOM, UI update and so on. Next, AngularJS can execute our custom functions whenever a value changed. Which means if A value changes, I would like to have my own function to be executed. If the value of B gets changed, I would like to have some other function to be executed. So if such is the case, you can define your own custom functions. And usually those custom functions associated with watches are usually called as watch listeners. Next, watches are used heavily in data binding. Even now you can see we are actually using watches, or AngularJS uses watches exclusively for the data binding purposes. Whether or not you use watcher, AngularJS framework still works with watches behind the scenes. So even you are not familiar with watchers, if you are working with data binding behind the scenes, AngularJS still works with all kinds of watchers, and it knows how to glue up all the watchers for the scopes to the respective DOM. Okay, how many number of watches I can use, or is there any proper way I can count the watches available in my application? Yes, there is a limitation based on the AngularJS recommendations. So AngularJS guys have recommended that it is better to use any number of watches as long as they fall into the count less than 2000. So which means your application, if it crosses beyond 2000 watches, it may or may not work properly. When I say properly, it might have some performance problems, but it is always recommended to keep the number of watches as low as possible in order to maintain very good performance and DOM UI rendering without really having too many problems at the UI or freezing of the browsers. Next, how to count the watches. There are several ways to count the watches, including you can develop your own scripts and actually count the number of watches with respect to the current scope or child scope or root scope, or even to the template or directive levels. But if you are a beginner, I recommend actually using a couple of Chrome extensions called Angular Watches or beta directly from AngularJS guys. So you can use either of these two if you are a beginner in order to have some understanding on how the watches are going to be created and how to get the count of currently working watches are currently created by AngularJS or by the users or both. Okay, let us quickly have a look at AngularJS Watches along with those plugins. So let me jump to my editor here. So right now you can see I have an HTML file. Essentially it has got jQuery, Bootstrap and AngularJS, which is currently linked to a01.js. So you can see I have a01.js here, and I also have ng app defined at the body level and controller emp. So I'm using emp controller at a div level, and you can also see I have the controller with the name emp in this case, and currently I do not have any scope definitions here. So currently I would like to have a couple of scope variables to be defined here in this fashion. So I would like to have scope A and scope B and scope C. So let me define B with a value 2, and let me define another scope variable C with a value 3. So in that way I have scope with 3 variables. So the next thing is that I would like to have the HTML to be modified in order to have those 3 variables to be displayed. So let us limit ourselves to 2 variables first. So in this case I would like to display something like input, and I would like to have two-way data binding with the scope variable A in this case. Okay, and next I would like to have another div, and in this case I would like to have A to be displayed. Similarly I would like to have B as well. So in this case I have B. So I have A. Okay, so I have A to be displayed in the form of a text box, so which means I will have a text box which will be having a two-way binding to A, another div which is going to have a one-way binding to A, another div one-way binding to B. And now you can see I have ABC already defined. So let us open this in the browser and see what's going on. So now you can see I have A, which is currently having a value 1 and which is automatically displaying here, and even the B value as well. So if I modify A value to 10, you can see the value of A 10 is being automatically modified in the other read-only bindings. So if I modify to 100, you can see how this is going to be modified automatically. Okay, so let me refresh this again, and I have AngularJS Chrome extension already installed, AngularJS Watcher. So if you are not familiar with extensions here, you can just always go to more tools and extensions, and at the very bottom you are going to see get more extensions, and you can just type in AngularJS Watches. And the moment you do that, you are going to see AngularJS Watches with this Turkish blue symbol here. So you can just add to Chrome. Right now I already added it, so it doesn't display add to Chrome here. So you will be having this kind of button to be displayed here, where the moment you click on it, you are going to see this one at the very top. So let me close all of this, and now I open my Angular Watches. So I just press F12, and once you press F12 you are going to see watches at the very right. And right now you can see it has actually figured out that there exist 3 watches in our application. So as I mentioned previously, I have only 2 variables and I'm actually binding to only like A and B here, but how come it has actually watching 3 at the same time? And as I mentioned, I have scope C, so let me create scope D as well. And in this case, let me put some value as 4 and let me refresh this. And even now you can see it did not change the value of 3. So what is happening is that it is not really working with these guys. So if you actually comment these and refresh this, you are going to still see the value as 3. So it is not going after the scope variables, it is really going after the bindings. So in this case I have 3 bindings. One is the 2-way data binding, the other 2 are 1-way data binding. So based on the number of bindings, it is actually creating the number of watches. So let me consider, I just wanted to comment this line and let me refresh this. Now you can see it has reduced 3 to 2, which means I have only 2 watches because my data bindings have only 2 in the markup. So similarly, okay, let me comment this whole thing and then you are going to see only 1 watcher. You can see that. So in that way you can see currently the number of watches are actually calculated based on the number of bindings you might be having as part of your DOM. Okay, so right now let us write some comments here so that we can have a better understanding. So something like watcher 1 and similarly watcher 2 and watcher 3. So just for our understanding, I have 3 watchers sitting in my application. Okay, so this is pretty much about the basics of watcher. So you have seen on how many number of watches are being automatically created behind the scenes by AngularJS framework. So I did not create these watches. Those are created automatically based on the bindings you define in the DOM. Okay, so let me delete this guy and let me open this one. So let us switch back to the presentation and now let us go to my own watch and listener. So what exactly are these? First of all, we can also add our own watch using watch function. So if you clearly remember in my previous one, I have said, like for example scope variable C, this one doesn't have any kind of watcher created by AngularJS because the scope variable C is not being used in the markup. There is no binding. So when there is no binding, in this case AngularJS doesn't treat that it is necessary to be watched, and thus it skipped the scope variable C. So this is not being watched at all. But for some reason, let us consider I would like to have the scope variable C to be watched and considered by AngularJS. So as AngularJS do not consider the scope C automatically, it is our job to actually ask the AngularJS to consider or to watch that particular scope variable C, and that can be easily accomplished using $watch, and that's exactly what I was talking about. So you can watch, so $watch is a method which is available to scope, and you can use $watch in order to have any kind of variable to be provided here. In this case I'm saying A, but you can say C. So which means if there exists a member variable called scope.c, you can define just C here, and that C is going to be watched. And as I mentioned, $watch function is always available for $scope, and not just $scope, it is available even for $root scope as well. If you are not familiar with $root scope or $scope or controller or whatever, just refer to my previous videos. And as I mentioned, $watch is always going to be used if and only if AngularJS does not consider your scope variable for watching. For example, scope variables not being used in data binding, as we have already seen. And watch listener, you can see that. So this is the function, or you can say simply a callback function. So this particular function is usually called as a watch listener because this is the function which gets executed automatically by AngularJS framework whenever it sees that the variable or the value of that variable A gets modified. So for some reason, if the value of variable A is being modified by some kind of data binding or by some other method within the scope, then watch will be automatically knowing that the value has been changed for the scope variable A, and it tries to check if there exists any listeners for that watching of that variable A, and if there exists any listeners, those will be executed. So in this case, this function is going to be executed if the value of A gets changed and will be automatically executed by the watcher. And it has got two values like new value and old value. So whenever the watcher sees that the value of A has been changed, it actually provides both its previous value and also the latest value for your functional method. So you can provide or make use of those two variables in your own business way, where you can calculate the difference between those two values, or you can also check whether you have those two values to be compared or to be placed inside some other variable or calculated with some other variable and so on. So in simple words, you still have access to its previous value and the latest value inside this function. Okay, so now that we have some understanding about $watch, there are various types of watches available as part of AngularJS. We have already seen $watch. You can see in my previous example, I am using $watch in order to watch the variable C. However, you are going to call $watch as always reference watch. Why it is called as a reference watch? So which means if this particular scope variable is a primitive variable, which means the data type of integer or string or whatever, it knows how to watch. But imagine if you are using $watch with an object, then it is going to be a different story. So in this case, you can see the scope has got an object O, and it has got three properties inside A, B, C with values 1, 2, 4 respectively. So O is not a simple variable in this case. It's not a primitive data type. So O is an object which internally has got three different properties. If such is the case, even though you use $watch with O, in this case it actually tries to figure out the change of this object from the reference perspective, but not really the properties perspectives. So which means even it happens like O.A has been modified, or B has been modified, or C has modified, this watch is not going to be working. If the O itself is modified, like for example O is being assigned to some other object, then this gets fired. So this watch is going to work if and only if the O is actually referring to some other object but not the same object anymore. So even if you happen to modify any of the properties inside the object, this is not going to be fired. Now this is just in-depth watch, so which means a deep watch. So you are using $watch but with a true value here. So you can see this code, this script and this script is almost same, except that you are actually providing true at the very end. When you provide this, it says that it is called as an equality watch rather than reference watch. Whenever I say equality watch, it actually goes through each and every member of that particular object O, whether it has been changed or not, to any much depth. So if this object has got another object inside another object and nested object and so on, it actually goes through each and every property and each and every nested object inside whatever you have specified the scope variable. And if there exists any change in any of those properties or in the entire hierarchy of that O, this gets fired. So that is called as an equality watch. Next one is watchGroup. So watchGroup is something like a convenient method whenever you would like to have same functionality to be applied against multiple variables related watch. So instead of writing scope.watch for both A and B separately for the same kind of business functionality, you might want to use watchGroup, where you can provide all the scope variables at once in the form of an array and apply this watch listener to be always executed whenever any of those scope variables get modified as part of that particular watch group. So if you define 10 watch variables here, if the value of any of those 10 variables are modified, then this scope watch will be automatically executed. I mean, the watch listener gets automatically executed. So this is just a convenient method which still works around $watch. And just wanted to be careful here, the watch group doesn't support equality watch, so you can't provide true here at the moment. Next, collection watch. So this is a bit different. So if you see, really there are three types of watches: reference watch, equality watch, and collection watch. And as I mentioned, watch group is just a convenient method or wrapper around $watch for having multiple variables to be defined. But coming to watch collection, it is mainly used to watch arrays. So in this case, let us consider I am having a collection of employees to be defined in this fashion. So which means I have an array with 4 objects, and each object having its own properties and values. And I can actually watch this entire collection just using $watchCollection and providing that collection variable EMPs. And if you happen to modify the collection related array, which means if I add a new object or if I remove an existing object from the array, like employees.push, in this case I'm actually adding a new object to the array, this gets automatically fired. It is very important to understand that it works at the collection level. So $watchCollection actually works at the collection level. So which means if you whenever you add or remove the objects inside the collection, then only this gets fired. For example, if you are modifying a value inside a property of a particular object available in an array, this is not going to be fired. So this statement, whenever you do as part of your controller, you cannot expect watchCollection to be working, as because watchCollection doesn't go at the property level and it goes only at the collection modifications level. So object modifications directly at the collection level, not really the properties of the object. But still you can achieve both. So which means I would like to have the watchCollection and also each and every particular property name and value, whenever they get modified, I would like to be knowing it. So if such is the case, you can still use the watch with equality watch. So you can still provide EMPs, but as you provide a true, it knows that it actually has to go to the content and nested content, or say nested objects and arrays, nested objects, and all the properties and all the values. So if you really want to have all the modifications of an array to be known, regardless of whether it is collection level or at the property level, you can just use your deep watch or say equality watch. So there are online tutorials which actually say that equality watch can also be called as a deep watch. So you can use either of those two words. Okay, so now that we have some understanding about types of watches, let's have demo. So let me switch back to my application here, and in this case I would like to have a couple of modifications to my scope. So C, in this case, let me put some value 4, and now I would like to have a function to be defined. So this is a method called update C value. So I am going to modify the value of C and based on the value of A star 4. So which means I am multiplying the value of A by 4 and keeping it into C. And at the same time I would like to have the scope C also to be watched. So which means, as there is no C available in my HTML, there is no data binding. When there is no data binding, C is not going to be scoped, or say C is not going to be watched. So in this case I would like to have my own watch to be provided for scope C. So I am going to say $scope.$watch, and I am going to say please watch C. However, I am going to provide the watch listener here, which actually provides both old value and new value. And now in this case I just wanted to say that if new value is not equal to old value, so I am going to say console.log I updated the value of C to some new value. So in this case, new value. So as you can see, I'm not doing any data binding here, but I'm just writing the value of C to the console log. So if the value of C gets changed, we are going to have some kind of notification at the console level. Okay, however, I need to make some modifications to A01 as well. So in this case, you can see ng model A is getting changed, but I need to call this function update C in order to have C to be modified. And I would like to call this update C if the value of A gets modified. So for that purpose, I'm going to say ng change. So this is a new attribute which we did not cover earlier. So this is the attribute which actually evaluates whatever the expression you type in here whenever the value of A gets modified. So in this case, I'm going to say please execute the function update C. So you can see this is the update C function which is actually assigned to scope. So both should be same. Okay. So this is the same one I'm using here. So whenever the value of A gets changed, I'm saying that please execute update C method from the same scope. And that actually in turn updates the value of C available at scope level. If the value of C gets changed as we are watching, it is supposed to display the message. So let me go back to my browser. Let me refresh this. And you can see now I have 4 watches. Why I did get 4 watches? So let me go back. So well, we already know that we have watch 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 watches from the previous example. And this is the 4th watch. So let me comment this a bit. And now let me refresh this. Now you can see it is down to 3. So which means whenever you have provided your own watch using $watch, you are actually increasing the watch count. Obviously, as because you are asking AngularJS to actually add a new watch exclusively for the scope variable C. Okay, being said that, you can see that ng change doesn't count as part of watcher. So whether or not you write ng change, the watcher will be still there as because ng change works with ng model behind the scenes. Okay, so let me go back here. Let me refresh this. Now you have 4 watches, the last one for C, and let me modify the value of A to 10, and now you can see I have the value of C updated to 40. And as there is no data binding here, we are actually writing to console log. So if I modify further this one to something like 20, so you can see the moment I type 2 into 4 becomes 8, then again I type 0, then 20 becomes 80 for C. So in that way you can have watchers to be actually defined exclusively on the variables for which AngularJS may or may not consider while it is accomplishing something different. Okay, you can also have multiple watchers. Like for example, in this case, imagine I do not want ng change at all. So you can actually remove this. But you can still have your own watch to be performed exclusively by A. So which means I can say something like watch A, and whenever A gets changed, I'm going to say something like okay, modify B as something like scope.A *2, and let me remove this one. So which means whenever A gets modified, I would like to have B to be updated, and B is actually having a data binding here, and it should automatically reflect there. Similarly, whenever B gets changed, I would like to have C to be modified. So which means A is not controlling C, but instead I would like to have B to be controlling C. So in that way, I am going to have something like this. So which means A updates B, or say A doubles B. So the double value of A becomes B, and again the double value of B becomes C, and when C gets updated we are going to log it. So let me save this and let us make sure that we have the same model here. And in this case we already have 1, 2, 3 watches, and on top of that 4, 5, 6 watches. So let us make sure we have 6 watches here, and you can see I have 6 watches in my application. And now the moment I type 10, you can see A value is 10, into 2 becomes 20, into 2 becomes 40. So even if I type in 0, you can see 100 becomes 200 for B, and 200 to 400 for C. So in that way you can still have multiple watches to be actually propagating those values based on whatever the new values or the old values you might be having. Okay, so now let us switch back to the watch group. So let me remove all of this and just have only one. Okay, in this case, instead of watch, I would like to use watch group. So whenever I have a watch group, it will be expecting an array here. So whenever it is an array, in this case I would like to have 2 variables to be watching. So which means if the value of A or if the value of B gets changed, please execute this function. So in this function, all I'm going to say is $scope.c equal to $scope.a into $scope.b. So actually I'm trying to multiply the values of A and B here. And let us not worry about the number of watches here. So I'm going to remove all of this stuff. So I would like to display C. So instead of this, I would like to have B to be displayed so that I can also provide the value of B just like I was providing A. So in that way, you can say I have A and B to be having text boxes to be two-way data bounded, and C being calculated based on the group here. So if the value of A or B gets changed based on the text boxes, C gets updated. When C gets updated, you can see it has to be updated right here. So let us save everything and refresh this. And I am not going to worry about watches in this case, so let me push that a bit. So now you can see I have 1 and 2. So if I modify this one to 5, you can see 5 into 2 becomes 10. And if I modify this one to 5, you can see 25. And if I say 1, 5 into 5, 1. So 5 into 1 is 5. So okay, 5 into 10 becomes 50 here. So in that way you can see whether you modify A or B, you are going to have C to be automatically calculated. So that is how watch group works in general. Okay, now we have not seen on how the objects really work. So let me take all of this out. And let me define a fresh scope, object O. And in this case, I'm going to say something like A as 1 and B as 2 and C as 4. So you can see those are not variables anymore, simple variables anymore, but instead all of these are available in the form of an object O. So now let us consider I'm going to say scope.watch, and I'm saying please watch O. And if it is going to be modified, I'm going to have this function to be executed. So as part of this function, I'm going to say if new value is not equal to old value, please execute my stuff here. And again, o.c equal to scope.o.a into $scope.o.b. So you can see I'm actually accessing A and B from object O and multiplying them together and placing into C of O. So let us see if this is working at all. And let me switch back to my A01. I need to do some tiny modifications here, as because A is not available straightforward. It is available in the form of object. Available inside the object O. So I had to do all these modifications. So you are accessing O.c, O.b, O.a here. Okay. So let me go back here. So looks like everything is ready. So let me refresh this. Okay, now I'm not worried about scope watches here or the number of watches. So let me try to modify this. So you can see whether, even though I'm modifying A and B values here, the C is not being calculated at all because it doesn't enter into this one at all. This is not working at all. But the moment I say true, which means a deep watch or say equality watch is supposed to be performed the moment I say true. So let me go back here and press F5. Okay, now I modify 10 and now you can see 10 into 2 becomes 20 and 10 into 20 becomes 200 and similarly. So whenever you would like to have the entire object along with all of its properties and nested objects and so on to be automatically taken into the consideration during the watch, you have to just supply true at the very last. So in that way you can have actually the equality watch to be performed. And of course you can still have the watch groups to be mentioned, like I can have a watch group with just O.A and O.B. Even that is possible, but I do not want to take that in this case. Or let me give you that. So I can just say so let me comment this. So in this case I can still use watch group OUP. Okay, so I can just say like I would like to go after O.A and I would also like to go after O.B. Even this is valid, so this is going to work. However, as I mentioned, it doesn't work with the deep. So I save this and I refresh this and it should work as it is supposed to be, and now you can see it is still working with no issues. Okay, so you can have the watch group, however you have to independently specify each of those property values, or you can have the entire watch to be performed in this fashion. Okay, so this is pretty much about the reference watch or equality watch or watch group. The last one is supposed to be the collection. So in order to save some typing for us, so I have already developed some script, so let me copy that. So let me go back to A01. Now you can see I am having EMP controller and I have an ng repeat, which actually displays all the employees collection in the form of divs. So I'm going to have employee number and employee name to be displayed for each of the objects available inside EMPS. What is EMPS? If you go back to A01, so you can see EMPS. So each of these objects are actually placed inside O, and we are extracting employee number and employee name properties from O and displaying in the form of div. So let me save this and let me refresh this. And now you can see I have employee number and name to be displayed in this fashion. And we also have a couple of buttons like add and modify the third employee related value. So if such is the case, you can see what add EMP is being developed. So if you go back here, add EMP is actually creating a new employee with these two automated values and adding using push to that array EMPs. And similarly modify third employee, which means you're directly accessing the third employee. The index starts from 0, so 0, 1, 2. The third employee here, which is nothing but this guy, related employee number to be changed from win to test. So let us see what's going on. I just refresh this and I click add. Now you can see all of these are automatically clear, and also keep a watch on this watchers count. So the more number of employees you add, you can see you are having more number of watches. So just imagine you are actually pulling 100 records using ng repeat. You are actually having 100 watches defined internally. And finally I have modified third employee. So just let us watch this 1003 win. So the moment I click on that, you can see the win has become test. Okay, we are clear so far. So let me refresh this and get back. So initially I have already 9 watches. So you have to always be mindful about the number of watches being added as part of your system. Okay, so now that we have the employees list and adding a new employee or modifying an existing employee, let us do this simple one. So I am expecting EMPs to be actually displaying number of employees here, and I'm just using $watch. So let me save this, and I go back here and do this. Now you can see it has displayed number of employees as 4. Obviously yes. And now I click on this, and I'm adding as many number of employees as possible, but I'm not getting number of employees here updated. So which means this watch listener is not getting executed for any of the modifications available directly to the employees collection. And as you can understand, watch is not for that. Watch is for the references. So if the employees collection is being modified with some other collection, then this is going to be fired. Okay, now let us go to watch collection. So here we are writing number of employees. So I go back here. So I refresh this, and now by default it is 4. And now you can see the more I add in, you can see that watch listener automatically gets fired. So for every new for every new element you add, or for any element you delete from the existing array, watch collection gets fired. Okay, now let us try to modify something like 1003 something. So it has modified test, but it is not really appearing here, as because this is not fired whenever you are trying to modify any object inside the collection. Okay, now the last one. This is our deep watch or the equality watch. So it is not collection watch anymore. So it is true at the very last. So which means everything which happens for EMPS need to be reported. And in this case, whether you modify or not, it just displays number of employees if any modification occurs. So this may not be appropriate in this example, but you can see that it actually goes through this statement for any modification of the employees collection. So just save this, and I just refresh this, and by default it is displaying number of objects as 4, and you can see all of the objects are actually being displayed here. And even if I modify third employee, you can still see that it is firing whenever the value of the particular object inside a collection has been modified. And that is how the deep watch works. So if you want everything to be watched, just pass true at the very end for $watch. And if not, you can use either $watchGroup or $watchCollection. So in my upcoming video, we are going to discuss about digest cycle.